Welcome to From the Trenches, Success Shortcuts Revealed by Real-World Innovators Crushing It Right Now. I'm your host, Scott Hartley, and we're back with another episode packed with actionable strategies from today's most successful entrepreneurs. If you're tired of generic business advice and ready for real, cutting-edge tactics that are working right now, you're in the right place. And today's topic, I kind of geek out on or nerd because it kind of touches upon my first business that I had, which was a small IT MSP company here in Southern Indiana. And I got into these conversations with plenty of clients before, but today we're going to dive deep into cybersecurity myths, protections, and actions. Now, before you tune out, this is critical information. We're not going to get too technical and too in the weeds on here, but it's stuff that you really need to be aware of. And I can't wait to share with you the transformational insights from our guests. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Robert Reuter. And his first technology mentor said, never use a computer to do something that works perfectly well on paper. And I can agree with that. So for the last 23 years, Rob's been working to help small businesses achieve that vision, having computers do for us what we cannot do for ourselves on paper. His company, IDEC Designs, Infinite Diversity in Infinite Combinations, is dedicated to the belief that there's room in the universe for every entrepreneur who has the vision and tenacity to solve a problem with technology that someone would pay to have solved. Whether that's data, security, process, or a marketing problem, Rob is ready to help. Rob, I'm so excited to have you on today.
All right. I'm glad to be here too, Scott. It's great to have a chance to talk with you.
Yeah, so Rob and I are in a couple of different networking and mastermind groups. So we've known each other for quite a while, and we kind of hit it off because we both have that technology background, right?
Right.
And one of the first things that I heard Rob talk about in the networking group that I met him in initially was talking about cybersecurity, and this is becoming more and more of a hot topic for businesses because there's a lot happening out in the world, a lot happening on the internet. But I know that one of the things that, that a lot of small business owners kind of bring to mind, or, when you bring up cybersecurity, it's like, oh, that doesn't affect me. I'm too small. I'm just a little itty bitty guy. They want the big guys. They want the government entities. They want the IBMs. They want the Walmarts and all those big stores. But I know that you've kind of got a different take on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Scott. I do find that is the common thing for small business owners, particularly. They think I'm too small to be targeted, or I don't have anything of value. And what I've been sharing with them is that these cyber thieves, these cyber terrorists, if you will, are really focused on vulnerability. Mm-hmm. They don't know who's on the other end of that address they got until they infect it. And then once they infect it, that's when they find out who or what. And on the whole thing about the value, what do I have? I think the challenge is that it's not the value you represent to them. No one ever gets wealthy on one thing.
Right.
It's doing the same thing over and over and over again that matters. So the question is, how much are you willing to pay? And that's what they're after. Are you willing to do 500? Will you do 1,000? Can they ask for 2,500? And if it's your business, how much would you pay to get that business back because they've locked you up in your data, your process, your everything you are is tied up in that digital asset.
Yeah, and we've heard the reports on the news of hospitals and other places, entire networks getting taken over by ransomware. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't have backups in place that have protected that data. And so the only option that they have is to fork over money to, the hackers.
Yeah. And there's a sad story in my location here in Spokane of a 50-year business that was gangbusters. They were in their 50th year. They had a big sale going on and things. And on the 15th of the month, something happened. And on the first day of the next month, they declared bankruptcy.
Oh, wow.
It was that fast. And it was
Wow.
because they didn't have a plan. They didn't know what was going to happen, and so the last little bit of legacy they left behind is, we regret being so busy we didn't have adequate backups.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that, that business owners and even like, there's probably mostly solopreneurs like myself,
Yep.
that are listening to this podcast, but there's all types of exposure that we have, whether it's data that's stored on our own physical devices, or maybe it's data that we have in cloud applications or software that we use online. What are some of the considerations that businesses of any size, but especially as smaller businesses, really need to be aware of? What do we need to look to protect, and maybe like how do we protect some of that?
Well, first of all, you have to look at what your risk is. So you have to understand, and one quick thing, you talked about the cloud and the local. I think it's oftentimes a misunderstood thing that if I put my stuff in the cloud, that somehow the cloud protects it. And the answer is no. In a legal standing, if you hold information about your customer, you are at risk for that. And most cloud providers are going to ask you to sign a waiver that says, if you get sued over some incident and it's not gross negligence, you absolve them of responsibility. So it comes down to you. So you have to ask yourself as an owner, do you accept the risk? Are you going to avoid the risk by saying, nope, I'm not going to do that? Are you going to try to mitigate, like go to an MSP like you or I are or have been, and say, please help me protect my systems and make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do? Or are you going to transfer that risk to an agent, a third party like an insurance company, and ask them to cover you should something happen? All of those are legitimate answers, but in order to get that mitigation or that transfer, you have to do certain things in order to demonstrate that you are following good practices with your technology.
Yeah. And, it's kind of one of those things where, where you have to demonstrate that you're following good practices. Probably most everybody on here is familiar with PCI compliance. And depending on what platform that you're using, sometimes you have to fill out these really confusing and long applications every year. And then, have, that testing that goes on every single month to prove that you're continuously following the best practices and the, credit card information and stuff like that is secure. But it really kind of goes beyond that. It's, the information that you have about, your customers and your prospects, and, how well are you protecting that? Speak for just a minute. What are some of the potential liabilities that we have if we're not protecting that information?
So every state in the United States, just not even looking internationally, just every state within our country has their own laws about data loss. And almost every one of them has written into them a penalty. If something happened and you are identified, you have to have a certain timing when you notify them that you have lost data or you have been exposed in an incident. And then two, if they do an audit as a result, they're going to be saying, if you've lost our data, then we're going to charge you for every record that you lost in your breach
Oh,
or in
wow.
your exposure. And that can change from state to state. But last research I did, Washington State was about $150 per citizen
Oh,
that
wow.
was caught up in that. So you take 100 of those, and here you are already 15,000 into
Yeah.
something. Lose 1,000. So how much exposure can you handle? And
Yeah.
that's why I often start with small business owners and I say, how much money have you set aside to recover if something were to happen?
Hmm.
And that's, that's ultimately your entire business is at risk. But the question is, do you have a plan
Yeah.
for that?
Yeah, so we have to look at, like the cost, that if we get exposed, whatever that looks like, there's going to be enormous cost to that. And it's not just the financial cost, but also you have to factor in, like the loss of trust,
Right.
of your customers
Reputation.
and
Mhm.
reputation and things like that. But then there is that cost. And so, yes, there is an investment to protect yourself, just like there is with everything. But it's going to be significantly less than if you have an exposure breach, right?
Right.
So
Yep.
I know that you have kind of this really cool acronym. You and I were kind of riffing on this, before we started recording.
Mhm.
And it kind of reminds me of the days of COVID where everybody was talking about
Yep.
PPE, right?
Right.
But you've got your own PPE that people really need to have in place when it comes to cybersecurity. So can you kind of briefly walk us through
Sure.
what that is?
Yeah. So this acronym came up because we were doing these cybersecurity webinars during COVID, and at one point we were busy telling people you need to have this, and I suddenly realized, hey, wait a minute, the acronym there is PPE: policy, procedure, and evidence.
Hmm.
And so we started saying, hey, this is the PPE for business, personal, protection equipment. Well, this is personal protection for your business.
Yeah.
So policy is a written statement that's organized and says, as a business, we adhere to this goal. This is what we're doing. And then you follow a standard. I recommend the cybersecurity maturity model uh, frame certification, or CMMC. It's a federally mandated requirement now for government contracts.
Hmm.
But the CMMC level 1 is very basic cyber hygiene. And if you build a policy for each of those elements, then you are following good practice.
Hmm.
Within that, though, you need to have specific step by step.
Hmm.
On Monday, on the first Monday of every month, we do, uh, you know, updates of our software. And so that's our procedure. And we write it down: step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4.
Hmm.
And then that's your P. So we have policy and procedure. And then to make sure that when that auditor shows up, you can demonstrate you've actually done the work, then you need evidence. You need a log of some sort. It can be digital, it can be paper, that
Hmm.
says, here is what I've done to demonstrate that I'm following the policies and procedures that I outlined for my business.
So we need to have that policy, which kind of guides us. This is how we're following the best practices, and the
Mm-hmm.
best practices that we're following. And the good news about that is that you don't have to come up with that on your own. So it
Right.
sounds like that there are resources out there that that the government's created, that people like you who work in the cybersecurity space,
Mm-hmm.
that you can help provide frameworks of the policy, and then just tailor that to your specific business. Is that right?
Right. Yep. You want to take an existing standard. As I mentioned, CMMC is the one that has become the most recent one that's applied, but CMMC is uh, based on a bigger standard called NIST. And,
Hmm.
and so depending on the size of your business, you want to pick a policy or framework that fits the kind of business that you run. And then
Gotcha.
just they will tell you what policies you need to write, and then you meet their guidelines.
Mm-hmm. And then within that, then you're going to have your procedures. So how are we actually meeting the standards of our policy? So
Right.
you have something to measure against. And then as you've got that created, so that's kind of like the homework that you have to do to build the
Mm-hmm.
foundation of everything. Then you actually just put it into practice. And then
Yep.
as you're practicing that, you're building up this evidence so that, probably if you have to have, cybersecurity insurance, they're going to ask for proof of that
Mm-hmm.
periodically. Just like with the
Right.
PCI compliance, you have to go through those tests.
Yep.
And then, if you happen to have a breach, that's definitely when they're going to say, okay, have you been following your policy and your procedures? Show us that proof. Is that
Exactly. And especially for those who have insurance, the insurance carrier will assign a coach to you to take you through the process of figuring out, okay, now you've had an experience and you're making a claim, let's get your policy out, let's get your recovery plan out, and let's go through the steps and figure out, when do we notify the authorities, when do we start the recovery process. And you want to have all that written down, because the worst thing you want to do is experience a problem and then make a plan.
right? Yeah, you want to avoid those problems to start off with.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of kind of the basic things? I mean, obviously, the policy, the procedures, and everything. But what are some of the basic things that solopreneurs and small businesses can just like start implementing right away, that would help build protections? And I'm thinking, things like along the lines of software and hardware. What are some
Mm-hmm.
things that even those solopreneurs need to have in place that's going to give them some measure of protection against a
Yeah.
breach, of their computer or their data?
Right. Well, so the CMMC has 6 elements. Level 1 has 6 elements to it. And they literally call this the basic hygiene. One, you want to have a plan for physical security. So much data is lost because somebody takes a laptop, throws it on their passenger seat, and then drives to the store. And while they're in the store, somebody breaks out the window and grabs the laptop.
Mm.
That person is now at risk for everything that's on that laptop. So physical security. When I travel with a laptop, I put it in the trunk. Nobody, they'd have to have some preordained knowledge that, oh, there's some really valuable things there.
Mm-hmm.
Physical accounts. How do you create accounts, and what, do you demand that everyone have their own unique IDs and so on?
Mm-hmm.
Password policy there. Permissions. We need to understand roles that people play and make sure they only have access to what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into maintenance. Communications. How do we follow data going in and out of the business? And then maintenance. Are we doing those patches? Are we adding the relevant security protections like VPNs and things like that to our activities? And finally, the last 6th element is the life cycle of data. You create data, you pull in data into your business, always have a policy in how you destroy data when you no longer need that data.
Mm-hmm.
Because the worst thing you can do is just keep accumulating it and then lose control
Yeah.
of all of that. So CMMC level 1, six of those core things.
Yeah. So when it comes, and we're speaking of the data, piece, I mean, with everything being digital nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to become a hoarder of all
Yep.
that data. We just let it pile up because it's not piling up on our desks, so we don't see it, and so we don't
Right.
think about it, right?
Yep.
So when it comes to like antivirus protection, for example, is what are some considerations, antivirus and then maybe physical firewalls? What are some things that small business owners may need to be aware of or that they should look for there?
So what I recommend, what people look for is, when it comes to antivirus, anti-malware, there's 3 basic approaches. The first one is the one we're most familiar with, and that's a scan of your machine, looking at documents as you download them based on patterns of recognized viruses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a fairly common thing that every antivirus does. The challenge with it is, I call it looking in the rearview mirror. In order for you to know if you're infected with a virus, it has to know what that virus was to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So what will happen is you have to find the virus, they have to mark it, and then they have to get it to you so you can recognize it. A better way is behavior. Viruses, when they get loose, behave in certain ways. So AI has the ability to monitor your computer. And so endpoint detection and recovery is a tool that goes and says, if this looks like it's behaving in a way a virus does, we're going to kill it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you really want to get advanced, you get into actually creating policies that block everything except for the things you need to do. And that's what we call zero trust, where you deploy something that locks your machine down and nothing can change until you authorize it to be added to or modified in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And that level is harder because we're in a hurry. We just want to grab that. I need that app. Grab it, download it. Oops, nope, can't do that. But that's the ultimate security.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there are different, I know when I was in the IT space and had my IT company, we started off with a couple of different antivirus software and found that it really was not effective at all. We had our antivirus service that we offered, and people were coming back with multiple infections. And then finally we switched to a different, basically it's that endpoint protection that you were talking about.
Right.
And, literally, and like this was no joke, every client that we put onto that software subscription, it stopped all antivirus or all virus infections.
Right.
Our revenue went to practically zero on virus removals because that software did such a great job. And but that's a good thing though, because you know that your system is protected. And I still have it, even though I have a Mac and, Macs are supposedly immune, to viruses and things like that, there still are vulnerabilities. And I have that software on my Mac still because I want to make sure that it's thoroughly protected.
Yeah, I have an interesting one where my endpoint detection even takes valid software and sees it sometimes as a threat and removes it from my system so cleanly that I'm going, where's my software? and it just saw a threat and eliminated it.
Yeah, but that's a good thing. I mean, you know that it's keeping you protected, at that point, even though it's a little bit of an annoyance. Now, obviously, one of the biggest banes to our existence is the need for passwords for everything. And I know there's a lot of people still that they have physical books that they write their passwords in. My mom is one of those, and I've been trying to get her to, to put it into a password management software. But even with the password management software, there's been some vulnerabilities. Like LastPass has been known to have a lot of vulnerabilities, to where they've had data breaches and things like that. What's kind of your recommendation when it comes to managing all the logins that we have to have for all of our online platforms?
So obviously everybody has to do something that they're willing to follow. And so I always temper this with a little bit caveat of saying effectiveness first, efficiency will follow. As an MSP, for instance, I have a password manager that is on my computer. So the computer I'm recording this from right now is the only computer in the world that holds the passwords to my customers' systems. I don't put it in the cloud. I don't do anything with it that would scatter that password to where it could be exposed. And I do that for a purpose. So I always encourage, that you be methodical about the where you do your work.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are some things you need to make simple enough that you can follow and go anywhere. But I would encourage everyone to use passphrases and not passwords, because a phrase is a lyric or
Mm.
something else where you take the letters and convert some to numbers, add symbols and things. But if you sit down at a computer and you have to remember your bank account, you go, oh, I remember, just sing the song and I know how my password is.
Mm-hmm.
Or I do ones, I'm visual, so I do ones that are patterns on my keyboard. I
Okay.
sit down and I can literally look at my keyboard, know where my starting key is, and go, oh, okay, boom, 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 boom. That's my password.
Yeah.
Uh, because you're right, you don't want to write it down.
Yeah.
You either want to encrypt it, like the password manager I use,
Mm-hmm.
or you want to be so clear about it that you can always remember where it is, or up here.
Yeah, I like that idea, of kind of converting to the past phrases instead of just
Mm-hmm.
a password. Because, if you choose a song or, whatever that phrase is going to be, the likelihood of that being known by somebody else is very, very minuscule. And then the likelihood of that getting, hashed out or broken into is going to be
Right.
almost impossible, right?
Yep.
So now what's your take
Exactly.
on two-factor authentication? Because I know I've had a lot of conversations with people that, it's like, oh, I understand the importance of it, but it's such a hassle because I just want to log in and get my stuff done, right?
Well, I think I gave away the secret on this. Effectiveness before efficiency.
Okay.
Yes, we certainly we don't want to be slowed down. And believe me, I have my moments where it's like between my phone and my iPad and things, I'm having to remember now, where did I record this one, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I can't put too little emphasis on how important it is to use that multi-factor authentication, because it is the only thing that you can do that guarantees, as long as you keep those devices, that it really is you.
Mm-hmm.
And I get, even today, people are trying to use that against us. I get every so often a notice from Microsoft that my authentication for signing in is, da da da. And I'm going, I didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to log into my Microsoft account.
Yeah.
And right there in the email, it'll say, if you didn't ask for this, it's okay, because you're protected.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody got that notice except for me.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing about it. And unfortunately, people get annoyed and then they go and respond. And that itself can be a risky
Yeah.
um, behavior. So we have to be careful, because a classic example, MGM Grand got hacked, and it all started because somebody found an employee online and then called the help desk and said, hey, I'm having a hard time getting into my account, and can you reset the password for me? And boom, they got into MGM Grand globally
Oh, wow.
and were able to impact their services to where they they couldn't get people into the hotels, they couldn't, the games were down,
Oh my
everything,
goodness.
because, and all it started with was somebody online followed back to the help desk for MGM Grand.
Wow, that's
So
crazy. And
yeah.
I had somebody that I know that and you have to really guard your two-factor authentication.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately there are some situations where you do have to share your login, and you've got it protected with two-factor authentication, so you do need to give that number out. But you want to make sure that it is to somebody that you know and that you trust. Because I
Right.
had somebody who actually ended up, they had two-factor authentication set up on their mobile banking app, but they thought they knew who was asking, and kind of following some procedures. And ultimately, they ended up giving that two-factor authentication out, and it was to a nefarious actor, and they drained their bank accounts.
Yeah.
And because the way most mobile banking apps are set up, you don't have a separate login for your business and a separate login for your personal. Everything's all tied together. And this person ended up having both personal and business accounts completely drained and then overdrawn. So you have to even safeguard that two-factor authentication and really hold that tightly, because
and that's where policy, procedure, and evidence are really big. You have to do this before you're in the crisis and have a strategy. I had a client who went through this where they had ACH attempts. Somebody tried to move money out of their account, but they had policy and procedures that the bank saw the activity and based on procedures knew this is unusual. So they reached out before they sent the money and said, "Did you authorize this?" And I said, "No, we didn't." But they had managed to collect. They know exactly who initiated it, where it came from, and so on.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's a challenging environment that we live in, but these are things that we absolutely need to take seriously, because the threats are only going to get worse. And it's not just, with our own physical devices and, maybe our cloud software, but I had an instance here recently where a client, that we're monitoring their email for them, and they have a domain that they don't use to send emails from. They used to, but they don't anymore. And what I discovered was monitoring their DMARC reports is that two subdomains got created on this domain about a month ago. And lo and behold, about a couple thousand emails were tried to be sent out over those subdomains. And I looked in their DNS records. Those subdomains did not exist on the real domain. And once I started looking at the IP addresses that the emails were trying to come from, they were over in China. Well, guess where a lot of the hackers and everything are originating? Over in China, over in the Middle East. And so, immediately we took more action to lock down that entire domain and subdomains. But basically, that would create a potential liability for this particular business because the emails would have purported to come from their domain. And so even those things that we don't think about have to be part of this policy, procedure, and evidence, this PPE, because it's all tied into cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. That is kind of scary. And it goes to show too that the actors don't target something for a specific reason. They just think of it as an opportunity. So small customer that isn't monitoring their email, isn't doing the common diligence because they don't think they're big enough, could be the footstep, the stepping stool into the next layer up.
Yep.
So that's the problem, is even state actors can be going after small businesses. I think the most up-to-date statistic is 46% of cyber threats are against small businesses, those under 50 users and and 500,000 or 5 million in revenues, because we're just so populous. There's so many of us out there.
Yeah.
That throw a stick and you're going to get a small business.
And they know that, that the small business owners have so many other things that they're taking care of that they're not going to pay attention to this until it's too late. And then, they have to deal with the consequences and put out this fire, which now, like you mentioned earlier, in just 15 short days, bankrupted, a company.
Yeah. Well, so, and that was a multi-million-dollar company, but they didn't have the means set aside to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, Rob, I really appreciate your conversation here today. I knew that I wanted to get you on and talk about this because it's not something that most small businesses are even paying attention to. And so I knew that you would be a great expert to tap into on this. And I know that you've got something that you'd like to offer the audience. Can you just briefly, share what that is,
Sure.
what that can do for them?
Sure. Yeah. So as part of my services and things and helping small businesses establish their security practices, first thing is to know what your risks are. And so we do a dark web scan where we can actually put in your domain, put in your specific email address, and we can go see if, in fact, you're already exposed. Because there is a business marketplace on the dark web, which is a whole majority of machines that are not listed in directories that are trading platforms. They're doing business and they're collecting people's emails and passwords and selling them. So we go and scan that and look for if, in fact, you're already exposed. And maybe your password's already out there and it's a good time to go and change your password.
Yeah.
So that's a free search I'm willing to offer anyone who would like to start to discover whether or not they need more protection.
Yeah. So the dark web scan is definitely a good starting point. So I would encourage everybody to request that. We'll put the link in the show notes where you can make that request of Rob, and he can look that up and then schedule a call with you to kind of go over like what does this data mean, because it's not easy just to look at the report and understand.
Right.
Like, oh, what do I need to do with this? It helps to have somebody, kind of explain what's the potential liability that you have there. So,
right. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Rob, thanks again for spending time with me today and sharing your knowledge with our audience. That's all for today's episode of From the Trenches. So make sure you request your free dark web scan to determine if you have linked or stolen credentials that present a liability to your business. We'll put that link in the show notes. And if you're looking to supercharge your email marketing, check out my book, Hit the Inbox, at hittheinboxbook.com. It's packed with 76 pages of strategies to get your emails landing in inboxes and driving sales. Thanks for tuning in today. And if you found value in this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite platform. It helps us reach more entrepreneurs like you. And until next time, keep crushing it in the trenches.